I released a video a couple of years ago on building heights and density. It was really just a way to talk about how restrictions in policy cause us to make trade-offs that make housing more expensive. But people really latched on to me saying, what I want to have is skyscrapers forever. No one shouldn't live in a skyscraper, which was fucking annoying. It was really, and I got tired of typing in the comments like, no, you didn't understand me. But I would constantly get the suggestion that the solution that we should do is build Barcelona-style superblocks. And I think that there's a common misunderstanding with this. When we're talking about the architecture, those are very, very dense walk-up buildings. And just even from the outside, it doesn't look like something that a North American developer would build. And I've always wondered what is about the preferences of the society that we live in and what is about the legal requirements, lot coverage, parking, that sort of thing, that the cities have. What makes it so that we can't build this sort of building? But I do know that there's places in Montreal that have a sort of medium density that looks pretty close, or at least the closest that I've seen in North America, to those Barcelona-style superblocks. So I thought, what we could do? We could take one of these old medium density neighborhoods, a building in that neighborhood, and walk through it and go thing by thing and see why this is not a thing that's built anymore. But I needed to find an architect. So I jumped on the Lonely Hearts section of the Montreal Urbanist Forum, MTL Urb. And I met an architect who comes from Montreal and knows the neighborhoods that I'm talking about, and also the legal requirements, regulations, and what it's like to build these buildings. So I want to introduce Zach. Could you give us a little bit of a background, about what makes you kind of interested in the urbanist stuff beyond the architecture?
Just always loved cities. I've always been into geography at all sorts of scales. And I guess at a smaller scale, you're looking at buildings and public spaces, right? You have these cities and they're a collection of elements of the built environment as well as people, how they interact. So architecture was kind of a natural fit.
Do you think that growing up in Montreal caused you to have kind of a preference for a certain sort of architecture?
I should preface by saying I always loved skyscrapers. But I really love fine-grained urbanity too. I mean, I don't think maybe I was from Tampa or whatever if I'd be so interested in architecture. I think there's something about Montreal. There's something about the way the city is built, the way it was planned, the way you interact with it that is very engaging. Even if you're not consciously thinking about it, I think it's there. I love many types of buildings. And I love Montreal because many types of buildings are present in it.
There's not that many cities in North America that have the large amount of heritage structures, but then sitting alongside them, constructions from every single other era. You have to be a kind of big East Coast city to get a lot of that.
I know we'd spoken in a previous conversation about Houston, right? No one here is ragging on Houston. Very interesting place, but it's kind of the anti-Montreal in many ways.
Yeah, I was actually, when I was there, I lived next to the historic district, and you wouldn't even know that it was the historic district. I don't know if there was a building there that was older than 70 years, It just looked like prefabs.
I blame cities for being maybe young. Yeah, I mean, look, Vancouver is a very young city. It's just over 100 years old, and I mean, it has some nice bones, but it doesn't have that much old density to work with, but it tries really hard. We're not talking about how expensive it is or any of that. We're just talking purely in terms of its urbanity. It tries really hard to create good urban environments.
So what's your specialty as far as architecture goes?
Nothing particularly special or out of the box right now. I do a lot of residential work, some multi-unit, some custom family home. I've worked on some retail projects and commercial projects. Pretty standard run-of-the-mill stuff.
And I guess we should say that you don't currently work in Montreal, so you're probably not going to catch every single thing. But broadly, would you say that the building code between Toronto and Montreal is how much of that is shared?
It's really similar. They're both based on the national building code. That's the model code, and every provincial code sort of is derivative of the national code. So when I researched for this, I went back and forth between Ontario's and Quebec's code. They're remarkably similar. I would estimate on the order of 80 to 90%.
Okay.
A lot of the general principles we're going to discuss are going to be the same.
How does it work as far as the kind of hierarchy of the building code? Can you explain that?
Where most people are concerned, the building code is broken up into two sections that mostly concern architect, part 3 and part 9. There's like a whole bunch of parts in between part 3 and part 9, but they deal with structure, they deal with ventilation, all sorts of things that I wouldn't reference on a day-to-day basis. Part 3 is for larger buildings, so above 600 square meters, for instance. Part 9 is for houses, buildings under that building area, a few other types of building. And they do have different requirements. Part 9 is, you might imagine, a little bit less stringent because it deals with smaller buildings, more customizable buildings. It's a little bit more flexible. So yeah, you've got these two main types, part 3, part 9. Most of what you'll see and what we're discussing today would be grouped under part 3.
So is it something along the lines of like, as the building gets bigger, the code gets more intense?
It's partially a function of size, but it's mostly a function of occupant load and user safety, right? So you can imagine a bigger building would typically house more people, or maybe it's a large building that doesn't house so many people, but it houses machinery or heavy industry. That will come with definitely a special set of rules and requirements. I think the building code exists there's no guarantees, but to ensure user safety. It does that remarkably well. It also gets into functionality. We let things like zoning deal with urbanity and to a certain degree aesthetics, but the building code really does a good job of spelling out what you can and can't do functionally to a building.
Does the building code kind of work like a hierarchy of courts, where the federal government's building code, everyone has to follow that, and then like underneath that you have provincial, and then underneath that you have municipal? Or can municipalities override and be like, oh, we don't care about that federal standard, we're doing our own thing?
It's kind of the other way around, actually. So there aren't municipal building codes per se, but in the city of Toronto, for instance, it has an accessibility standards guide. It addresses some things that are not found in the code, and you would have to follow that for things dealing with accessibility. But typically, you would follow the provincial building code. When there are discrepancies between the provincial building code and the national building code, you can appeal for a code review to the higher order code, the federal code.
Is that common? Is there like a common case where there is a kind of gray area that comes up a lot?
Yeah, I don't think it's really particularly common in professional practice. I haven't experienced it personally. I've never gone through a code variance.
At the municipal level, it's kind of more like bylaws, right? And review panels for things that the community's decided to focus on and stuff, right?
There are prescriptive bylaws too. The municipality will tell you like the size of your parking stall, for instance. Like the building code isn't concerned with maybe perhaps that level of detail, but like if you read through the zoning, and it can vary borough by borough, as I found out in my research for this project, there are municipal and borough standards for different sizes of different things, but typically not where it concerns life safety.
The court hierarchy kind of works, but there's this other element to it of the discrepancy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that jumped out at me was parking minimums. Plateau, I found a parking maximum, but for residential, I couldn't find, and maybe I missed it, but I couldn't find a parking minimum. Certainly, there are parking minimums elsewhere in Montreal for residential uses. But I mean, that's kind of what makes the city interesting, right? You do have that kind of built-in tapestry, which is kind of neat.
Like London is a city that has this, right? Like the street signs change. Actually, yeah. So does Montreal, now that I think about it. When you go into Montreal East, you'll notice like, oh, signs changed. And it's like just the slightly different font and stuff that borough has, or that city has decided to put in. This is the house of a very nice couple I met who do YouTube videos about urbanism, and they're like really interested in like bike infrastructure, that sort of stuff, called Urbanity, Jasmine and Pat. So they like were leaving Montreal to Ottawa, which is a terrible idea, but like gonna have to forgive them. And they let me go into their house and film it and measure it and create a floor plan, which I sent to you. I'm very sorry. I had to learn how to use CAD software to do that. So that was incredibly painful, actually.
Did a good job.
Do you love it? Like a fish in water?
I can really get into it, yeah.
What do you use professionally?
AutoCAD, Revit for drafting, for like plans and technical drawings and stuff. Other programs for 3D modeling. I think you did it in SketchUp, right?
It was really annoying. They've got like a new web version. The documentation and everything's like, no one's giving you tutorials on the version that you're actually using. And then all the controls are kind of inverted. So it's different to graphic design software. So it's one of those things where you're always, hitting a button that has this other impact and then having to like figure out how to get it back to where it was. I've put together this tour. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to look at these kind of 3 angles on the various features of this kind of classic Montreal medium density walk-up. We're going to look at the legal and regulatory stuff. So I've got here as an example, you have to have the fire exit needs to have this element to it now, these kind of safety building code, bylaw, hard policy that the government's going to be like, no, you can't do that anymore. The second thing we're going to look at is preferences in fashion. And so this is something you'd know really well. Stuff that you're like, we could do that, but no client would want you to, So like no one's going to want to walk up 5 sets of stairs. They're going to want to have an elevator. Maybe you could get away with it, that sort of thing. And then the third thing is economics. So this is where there's stuff that old buildings have, which were inexpensive at the time, but have now become really expensive. So I've got as an example, like carved wooden features. My neighbor renovated his pretty standard Montreal walk-up a few years ago, and he had the like handcrafted, like beautiful ornate features that you could tell someone had just done with a knife. And that was a kind of standard thing on a Victorian row house back then. Now it would be like 3D printed, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
So we're going to look at those 3 things. I think kind of broadly, that's a broad net that kind of will catch why we don't have, developers building exactly this sort of building anymore. This is good. It's like architect reacts. Here is our kind of overall lot plan using a muddle of colors because I couldn't figure out how to make stuff stand out any other way. So I've got a little character down the bottom showing where the camera is sitting for the following shot. So let's just have a look at the front elevation. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Anything kind of just like, sticking out at you here?
Let's talk about, I guess, the building. It's 3 stories. As mentioned before, it would fall into the part 3 of the building code. The thing that really sticks out when I look at this building is there's really no barrier-free access to it whatsoever. As part 3 building, you'd need to supply some barrier-free access to people who are lesser abled. So none of the units can be accessed with a wheelchair, for instance. You've got stairs leading to the upper level units, and you've got sunken, slightly below grade units. That's something we couldn't have if this building was built today. You'd have to have either some ground floor units that were accessible at grade, or you'd have to have a common entrance and access the barrier-free units either on the ground or via an elevator to the upper level units. Construction looks good. I mean, it's pretty standard, definitely standard Montreal. You've got concrete foundation and masonry, all good there. Non-combustible cladding. I guess the building is 3 stories tall. That's about right. Consulting the zoning, definitely the plateau is actively encouraging dense developments of this kind of size and height range. No reason you couldn't build a building of this size. It takes up about as much of the site as the plateau allows for this site. Really what you'd need at the very least is to provide some barrier-free units on the ground floor of this building that can actually be accessed. So either by a common entrance at grade or by individual dwelling entrances at grade. You don't, strictly speaking, have to provide barrier-free units on the upper levels here. Yeah, that's one thing this building couldn't get away with if it were built today, and that's obviously one of the reasons we can't have a Barcelona-style walk-up. They must have their own barrier-free rules that they use now, but I'm just not familiar with them. So I looked at the setbacks for this zone. The side setbacks were like 1.5 meters, so obviously this building wouldn't respect those today. This building, we think it was built in 1932. It actually does predate the building code in Quebec. Published in 1941. You can excuse it for not following the 2020 building code.
It's interesting to me that we got so close to an acceptable building without. It's not like without the building code, you ended up with just absolute insanity.
Yeah, I mean, people were still trying to create like fundamentally nice, functional homes and buildings and spaces for people. I guess there just wasn't like an overarching authority. Now, I'm not sure if there was something before then. Maybe it was fractured up into like a million different sort of rules and regulations, but the first published building code for Quebec, I think, was in 1941.
Was there a federal building code?
Don't know. I'm not sure. There would have had to have been. I'm not sure which came first. Quick Google search, though, for the watchers could probably solve that.
Can I get you saying, absolutely? And can I get you saying, no, there wasn't actually? And then we'll just put in the one that makes you look like a genius.
Yeah.
And then I also thought like the angle just back a little bit was a good point, a good place to talk about coverage, because you can see kind of pretty clearly there that we're talking about a pretty high level of lot coverage.
It does seem to be quite high. Now, you know, in most newer cities, that would probably be frowned upon. This zone of the plateau, I think, allows 70% lot coverage. So this building looks like it's a bit higher than 70%, but it's got some open space. It's more or less in line with what would be acceptable today.
It's hard, obviously, when you're kind of, I was there with a tape measure and I didn't want to creep out the occupants, especially with it not having a setback. So I'm literally looking through their window with a tape measure. So it looks like it's 362 square meters, which will probably be off by anything up to like 50 meters. And then when you calculate lot coverage, what is that? Is that the footprint of the foundations of a building, or would that also include like the balconies?
I don't think that a projected balcony counts towards the lot coverage. So it doesn't count towards typically the gross floor area. It's just the building footprint divided by the site area.
So that would put it at, really, it seems low, 57%.
Believe it or not, that's still like pretty high for most buildings that would be built today.
I would guess that some of my footprint would probably be a little bit off, because, you know, there was the balcony part was kind of walled slightly, so I was kind of guesstimating it.
Well, that's fair. I mean, we'll call it 60%, where 70% is allowed.
Yeah, and then the other thing, like I think that's fairly obvious from this, is for a building with this many units, there's zero off-street parking.
I mean, that is atypical. This wouldn't work for this building. There's a parking maximum, so I think they suggested half a parking stall per dwelling unit. A quick Google Earth tour of the neighborhood, you see alleyways leading to at-grade parking, sort of in this gray zone, where this gray zone is on the model up here. Maybe if this building were built just 10 years later, when the car was more of a thing, it would have some sort of parking. Pretty common in Montreal to see a few cars parked at the back, accessed through an alleyway.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like parking is the most changing, at least municipal bylaw. It's had this real big kind of like, oh no, you need it. Oh no, actually you don't need it. Oh, actually we don't want you to build any of it story over the last century.
We're starting to hear about cities and boroughs starting to eliminate parking minimums. I mean, which is great. In a perfect world, you could support less cars with better transit. I should also point out there is bike parking regulation in the zonings. This building built today would actually have to supply bike parking. But that's also a great way to do away with more car parking, right?
It's an immensely plateau dwelling experience this unit has. Like, it's the sort of thing which would really set off a comment section on the Montreal Gazette.
You'd be surprised though, like, you know, bike parking is a thing in many places. I mean, the plateau is probably ahead of the game. Who knows how long bike parking has been in its zoning bylaws, but it's a thing here in Toronto now, even, you know, developments in more suburban neighborhoods.
And I guess the thing with bike parking is you get a lot for the space that a car would occupy, right?
It's a great idea if you provide like the basic minimum bike infrastructure, right? That's on the city. If you put a high rise next to an 8-lane street, you may need the bike parking by law, but I'm not sure if it's going to do you much good.
Does the parking have to be put on the private property, or is it possible for you to just have a bike rack out front?
You have to put it within your property line.
You'd probably get the little residents only sign put up by a grumpy grandma?
Parking, both for cars and for bikes, is often divided up into visitor and resident parking, or like long-term and short-term.
What about car sharing co-op, electric charging stations? Like, is there anything coming in with that's kind of changing things around?
Yeah, so zoning is starting to mandate that a certain amount of parking stalls are dedicated to electric cars. I mean, you don't have to park your electric car there, but when you build a new building, you have to supply the electrical infrastructure such that the parking stall can be made into a parking stall with a charging station.
Do you see any stuff kind of coming, say, in, I don't know, 20, 30 years?
The more and more we do away with parking minimums, I mean, the less we have to excavate for underground parking lots, right? I mean, you can go 4 or 5 floors easily underground just to accommodate parking. You're dedicating a lot of space, a lot of material just to park cars. You know, I mean, in a perfect world, there would be a better use for this space.
Was there anything else there? Like, do we want to talk about the land titles at all?
Yeah, I mean, what was curious about this building is actually under 2 titles, right?
Mm-hmm.
This building that looks very much like one building is actually 2 buildings. And the only way you actually see it is from an aerial photo. It looks to be joined at the roof. Probably, I would speculate, with a firewall in between them, which is kind of interesting. But it really does look like one contingent building, which is kind of the way we're treating it for the purposes of this discussion. Like
the developer today would be building both buildings at the same time, you know, using an economy of scale to get it done, and then maybe selling it off as 2 titles, right?
Yeah.
Although today it would be more like it's probably going to be a condo, right?
100%. So people might wonder why we're saying this building is 3 stories, and it's because the floor that is slightly sunken below grade does not count as a story.
That's important for...
Yeah, that could be important to decide which half of the code it's classified in.
Cladding. Okay, so I'm a brick guy. Like, I love my bricks, you know, known for that. Big brick advocate. So yeah, you know, I look at this and I'm like, yep, brick looks like Montreal. Why that choice? Would you do it today for the legal and economic reasons?
So legally, it's a really good building material. It's non-combustible. Preference-wise, most of us would probably agree brick is aesthetically pleasing. You can do patterns with it. You can do different colors of brick. I mean, it's a great building material. Economically, we're starting to see it fall out of favor, though. You see a lot of the new developments around town use what looks like brick, but it is actually a precast concrete panel.
The devil can take many forms.
All right, then.
Where they stamp the brick pattern, the brick relief, in at the factory. So you have these big, large panels that they often bring in with trucks. They're made to look like brick. To the discerning eye, like the brick pattern won't wrap around, so you can tell they're not actually brick. Like the stamp only goes too far. Now the problem there is the panels are, as you might expect, cheaper than brick. The effect is that as we use more and more brick precast panels, just less and less brick, the price of brick goes up relative to the precast, and the sort of qualified masons become rarer and rarer, right? So it can be a skill set that we're losing. It's kind of like this vicious circle, right? Because the less brick we use, the more expensive brick is going to become relative to other building materials as the sort of know-how progressively declines.
What is with the choice to use concrete dyed black bricks? I see that a lot.
I see that as well. I think that's just very like aesthetic. Someone made a call, someone prefers it, that's all.
Is it like, because concrete and clay, are those materials kind of seen as interchangeable, or is there...
Technically speaking, it's a different wall system. The concrete is cheaper, especially in Quebec. We produce tons of it, right? So economics might play into that decision for sure. You can make it look pretty close, but it's not really the real thing.
I would really like for someone to watch this video and it's just like me being obsessed with bricks for an hour. And then anyway, whatever, there's some fire code stuff. All right, thanks for watching, guys. I'm endlessly fascinated with them, actually. Let's get into the house. So here's the exterior staircase. So we're going up to the top. It's kind of one of these, you work your way up the outside and then you do the last flight through an internal staircase. Do you see anything here, Zach, you want to point out?
Perhaps the spacing between the pickets on the balconies might be too large. You're allowed a maximum diameter of 100 millimeters so that hypothetically an infant's head couldn't pass through the picket. So that space there between the bottom rail and the actual balcony looks like kind of suspect. I could probably slide out of that thing. I don't know.
I can't anymore, sadly.
COVID has changed things, yeah.
Yeah, COVID has really made me less susceptible to infantile injuries, one small benefit. We also have rise and tread on stairs.
Typically with older buildings, you might see that the stair is a little steeper as a function of rise and run than would be permitted today. If it's not like slightly outside what's required, it might just be on the steep end of what's allowed.
Is there any kind of barrier-free issues like in this kind of last little stage here when we go inside?
I mean, obviously this isn't barrier-free. No one in a wheelchair is getting up these stairs unless someone's carrying them.
What if they're in a movie that's super inspirational about someone who like makes it work at the top floor of a Montreal Walkup?
I would pay for that movie.
This guy is lowering the cost of construction, one painful pull of a handrail at a time.
If we have a look at this handrail there on the right-hand side of this stair, it's probably not to code. So typically they prescribe a maximum diameter or perimeter of the actual railing. This one looks too big, and I'm not sure it's sufficiently offset from the wall. Typically, you need 2 inches. I don't think this would fly today. Also now, you need certain extensions and terminations at the top and bottom. It looks now like at the top, if you extended that handrail horizontally as you would be required to, it would run past the door.
Is that just to give someone, like if they were in a wheelchair, like some space and assistance to like get in and out?
One of the things it's for is if perhaps you're visually impaired, you would understand that the stair was over, that you're at the top. There are also tactile warning plates that are installed at landings. So again, if you're visually impaired, you would feel a change in floor relief to signal that you've reached a landing.
At a traffic light, like sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. They're just like plates with raised relief, little buttons that are installed on the floor, because it's important to point out not only is this your entrance stair, but this is also one of the means of egress.
Like in a fire, for example.
Yeah, so you need 2, right? So this is one, and then the rear one, which we'll see later, is another.
All right, so I think we're good to go into the unit now. I put a lot of effort into these animations, It's like it took me 2 to 3 minutes, so I had to make them because my tour was so disjointed because I was trying not to film Jasmine's mum. All right, so here's the bathroom.
As far as the standard bathroom goes, like there really doesn't appear to be an issue with this bathroom, right? I mean, if this unit were a barrier-free unit, you'd have to have more space in the bathroom. It would be quite a bit larger to allow for the turning of a wheelchair. You need a variety of grab bars, not only next to the toilet, but also in the shower. A shower seat is also prescribed. There's just a whole bunch of requirements for barrier-free spaces that obviously this not being a barrier-free unit doesn't have. As far as like none of the fixtures, there's nothing wrong with the fixtures.
Something I was wondering is when did buildings typically start having interior toilets? I know there's like on the plateau, there's places you can see the kind of old back house. Would this have been in this unit when it was first constructed?
I'm not sure. I mean, I suspect that modern plumbing systems have evolved quite a bit in the last like 90 years. From what I know of the plateau, it was historically like a working class neighborhood way before it became chic.
Pretty safe to say that no one's going to buy a house that doesn't have a toilet now.
Yeah, good luck getting rent on a unit with no toilet.
There are some things like that. We'll come to a few others later where when you talk about the challenges of construction in the modern era and you compare it to the past, they didn't have to think about things like 3 toilets in the house. It was normal just to have 1 or none. I think that covers the bathroom, a surprisingly free of challenges area of the house. And then we're having a look just at the cupboard over here. So yeah, this is just the entranceway covered. Yeah, have you got any comments there just on the like size, legality, that sort of thing?
There's nothing wrong, legally speaking. It seems generously deep, right? Oftentimes in a newer building, you size a cupboard to basically fit a hanger, which is about 2 feet deep. So this looks, I'm just eyeballing it, maybe 4 feet deep.
That is one thing just on the preference like points here. I noticed my friend moved into a modern condo and I was struck by how much storage there was in the condo. Like it was very, very meticulously designed to kind of have every space that could be used for storage, that was like at certain heights and, to fit around appliances and, we can throw some more storage in there. Is that a big consideration these days with?
You try and put closets in each bedroom. You try and have at the very minimum an entrance closet. And obviously where you can't accommodate more storage in a unit, there typically are storage lockers in a building in common rooms that sort of supplement what you might not be getting.
On buildings of this era, is there typically no common storage?
I lived in a Walkup in NDG. It had some storage in the basement, but maybe more of an afterthought, like maybe more of something that was done later. Couldn't tell you if older buildings were conceived of to have more storage or less, but certainly we've grown to like it.
So onto the bedroom. And Patrick, pipe up if you have any kind of like comments on anything, like at least like your experience of actually living in this place. In this room, I kind of noticed you can pretty clearly see that there's no sprinklers in the roof. How does that work if you wanted to build this building again? Would it have to have sprinklers?
So yeah, today we're seeing the buildings built with sprinklers in the corridors and sprinklers in the units as well. It provides like a lot of peace of mind, right? In case of an emergency, in case perhaps you can't escape your unit. No one wants a repeat of the Grenfell Tower catastrophe. Functional sprinklers would really, really have gone a long way.
It seems to me that sprinklers would be one big ticket item to add to the cost of construction these days. Because, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that basically like running kind of a parallel plumbing setup?
You're running a lot of lines through the ceiling, right? You would have had to previously sprinkler some common spaces anyways. I'm not actually sure that sprinklering the actual units is too drastic of an upcharge.
When did sprinklers first make an appearance? I assume they didn't exist in units this size in the 1930s.
I'm not sure. I don't have the exact answer for when they made an appearance, but putting them in units is very recent.
And I assume sprinklers are defined in the code at a pretty clear level, but from what you're saying, people still will be asking for sprinklers even at a much smaller.
Sprinkler requirements are a function of occupancy type and building size, generally speaking, and also what the building is made out of.
Oh yeah, this is the bit where I get you guys. Yeah. Also over in the corner, you have the air conditioning unit. And I know Reese Martin, the RM Transit, he lives in a modern condo that doesn't have central air conditioning, which I thought was kind of intriguing. I thought that would be a kind of like must have. But yeah, what's the situation with aircon? Is it required at all?
There's no requirement for air conditioning. As far as a preference goes, like anecdotally, we just moved from an older building with none to a newer building with central air. And it is just a wonderful, wonderful existence. It's on right now. It's great. We used to have one of those window fans that sort of pumps in the air and cools it. You just like sit in front of that thing for hours and try to exist. If you're going to install central air, you can raise the rents. It's a legitimate thing that people will pay a little bit extra for. It's certainly a perk.
Do you think with the kind of climate change, heat wave things that we're experiencing, it will be seen as necessary because grandma might get heat stroke?
On the one hand, I'd say yes for user comfort. On the other hand, it's a lot of energy. There's nothing wrong with having air conditioning and that kind of thing, but if we can run them off of renewable sources, that would be the best, right? I mean, we still don't seem to have that quite figured out. Look, it's not a luxury item anymore. I think to a certain extent, people who are shopping for new rental apartments or new condos will come to expect that they're equipped with air conditioning, if not already do expect.
Is there a legal kind of building code thing regarding like energy efficiency and window design?
Typically, when you go to the city to get approval for your building, if the building is of a certain size, you have to submit an energy report. Certainly the window quality and the number of glazing panels it has plays into the building's energy efficiency. A bedroom window needs an openable section. I mean, this window appears to have it actually. It has a sliding window, but there are size requirements It has to be small enough that you can't get out of it, right? You can't fall out of it.
Oh, that's interesting. This one is, the opening is...
This window wouldn't fly anymore.
Okay, right. I thought that the size requirement was related to being able to jump out the window in a fire. But it's more like you don't want a kid to be able to like climb out the window and hurt themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, you're covered with two means of egress. You wouldn't legally use a window as a means of egress. So the size requirement for an openable section is so that you can't fall out of it.
That's why you see it in like modern condos. They have these big windows, but you just, a tiny little kind of latch that you open up.
That's it.
Let's have a head out onto the front porch, which has a few features that I don't think I ever see on a modern building. In a legal sense, does it have the same issue with the like kid getting underneath it?
It does look, as we touched on before, that the gaps are a little too large. It's a little strange that this balcony is shared between two tenants.
That strikes me as something that people don't like anymore.
100%. Today, at the very least, you would have a partition divider. It could be made out of glass or another material. It might not even go full height, but you'd have some sort of privacy separation there.
Yeah, because I assume with it being like that, no one really wants to use it.
Right, exactly. If you know which space is yours, it's easier to feel comfortable using it. It would have been nicer if there was a divider.
Did you ever use it for storage like they have with the bikes?
No storage. Often we would go out there if the back balcony was being used by somebody else on the same floor, if it seemed like that was a little too crowded. We have seen around the neighborhood like a similar setup where it's shared but divided up, like a wooden divider, and that would have been better for sure.
It's a very awkward negotiation, I assume, with a neighbor being like, I'm not lame, but can I draw a chalk line? Like, just for everyone being okay with this shared space.
We did get more comfortable using it over time when we realized that the neighbors never use it at all. I don't think those bikes moved once in the almost 2 years we were there.
It's a bit awkward also being sharing a balcony that's so close to the bedroom of your neighbor.
That's true.
Where, like, if you actually just like were to walk to one end and you could just accidentally see someone's penis or something like that, and that would be a challenge because you also share an exit, right? So you're going to be like just seeing that every time you see your neighbor.
In the summer, they had an air conditioning in too, so that blocked their windows, so it was a bit less of a privacy concern.
I could see if I had that situation, just having it covered. Can you imagine waking up in the morning and you look out the window and there's just someone's head?
Here's Johnny.
You have this note here on preference with Canadians and their love of balconies. I noticed this too.
I don't know what it is. It's something I just can't quite put my finger on, but it seems like most new developments, if not all, have balconies, right? We have sort of struggled to integrate them into the building aesthetically. A lot of buildings in Canadian cities are like a box, but they're dressed up with random balcony patterns, kind of like putting lipstick on a pig, right? You see them all the time, everywhere, like the balcony is dictating the public face of the building. And I'm not really sure what it is. I suspect that Canadians hold their outdoor space very dearly, but in a sort of privatized form. Like even in the States, in some luxury buildings, like you don't see that many balconies. Surely they have their terraces and stuff, but you see them way less, right? And in other societies, your balcony is in your outdoor space. The common outdoors is the outdoor space.
Do you think that it has something to do with a barbecue?
Well, in many new buildings, you can't actually barbecue on your balcony.
This is Canada. Why would you do? It's something I noticed when I first moved here. I remember there was a high-rise, like an apartment building, and just noticing that literally every single unit had its little steel barbecue. When you raised this point, I wondered if it was something to do with the kind of ceremonial Canadian spring barbecue. You go out on your balcony, and because there's been snow, like an American maybe has a backyard or can just leave their barbecue like on a terrace or whatever, and it's not going to get covered in a lump of snow for like 3 months. But here it's like you want to have your outdoor shit kind of like close at hand.
Could be. Just because you're not often allowed to use them doesn't mean people aren't doing it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm not supposed to use my little barbecue, but like I do all the time, Like it's a charcoal barbecue. Don't know. Like what the state is of those things, I don't really want to ask.
I won't tell anyone, and the internet surely won't know.
It does seem a little weird that I'm allowed to like light a little fire in my backyard, every couple of weeks.
One thing just on balconies, when we moved from Toronto to Montreal a few years ago, it really seemed like Montreal had noticeably more balconies than Toronto.
Is that something to do with the kind of walk-up exterior staircase? You're kind of getting a balcony anyway, so slapping another one on if you've got the contractor there in the past.
You're building platforms anyways, right? As a function of the stairs, you might as well use them for more than just arriving and leaving.
There's also an element of it being very lifestyle-y for Montreal. Like people kind of really love that, like the sun shining in, glass of wine, slightly social living thing here.
Toronto is more oriented towards single family houses and, detached and semi-detached buildings. So there's probably less need for a balcony if you have a yard, right? That's either yours or shared.
So yeah, there's another thing here. The mature trees kind of goes without saying, but maybe it's underappreciated that once a neighborhood is 50 years old, all the trees that got planted during development mature, and it really does change the look of a neighborhood. It's hard for a new development to look as nice because we like trees. So it's just a product of being an older neighborhood that you get to have like a booster aesthetically for the look of the street.
Yeah, I mean, it should come as no surprise that like cities are actively trying to green themselves. If you were to build this today through the permitting process, you would also submit a landscape plan to the city.
Oh.
Yeah, they'd review it for vegetation that was added. You might bring an arborist on board to protect trees that are already on site. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to destroy trees that are blocking your building. Typically, you'll have to replace them with something else.
You might be able to talk to this. Something I've noticed recently at architectural renderings is these fucking buildings look like a goddamn tropical rainforest. Like it looks like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Is that just so that the development will kind of like get through various like aesthetic review boards, or like who's doing that?
So like typically for a large building, the city will ask for a rendering. The city is more interested in studying the massing and the material selections of the building. The rendering that's covered in trees is more of a selling point. I mean, the purpose of the render is, I think, more to sell than it is to show greenery to the city. Have
you ever experienced kind of a group of architects coming together and being like, these motherfuckers, they may put so many trees on this building. Like, it's kind of like you can't even see my work through the goddamn trees. Like, is this a thing that people in your profession talk about?
I think there's like an article on Arch Daily or something that complains about the amount of trees on renderings being unrealistic. They'll show the rendering and then the finished product, right? Which contains very few to no trees that are sort of visible, like hanging lushly off edges of the building. I really do think it is just to sell a lifestyle, right? I mean, architects don't need a rendering to comprehend what it is they're designing. Rendering is to communicate the design to, a layperson who is interested in spending lots of money on a unit.
This is great, Zach. So basically, like you're like, renderings are for the plebeians. I do not need a rendering.
I'm going to be honest. I love renderings. I think they're like legitimate artwork. Some of them are so cool. And people who can render well are super, super talented. I would suspect that the renderer is also like shaking his head or her head as they place all the trees because the client asked for more trees. That's what I think it is. I think there's a presentation center. That's where the renderings are going. That's their main purpose. You have a corner building next to another building. You show the best angle. Sometimes the perspective doesn't exist in reality, but you're trying to sell a concept.
If I was to do another architecture video, it would be Architects React.
I'm like, dang. Everybody human, everybody make mistakes, man.
Because I find them all very funny, especially like when the characters are placed, and there's always like so many people pointing.
Yeah. They're stock cutout guys, yeah.
Check out that tree. And then it's like, check out that pool. And, and then everyone is 28 years old. I don't know. They're just this kind of creepy, weird, like it actually looks like a Black Mirror episode. Something's gone awry with the world. It's very, very, everyone lives in a goddamn vertical farm and is super interested in, highlighting architectural features. But evenly spaced apart.
They never age. They eat whatever they want. They do whatever they want. Clearly, they don't have to work because there's so many people grouped outside this building at like 11 a.m.
Wearing like fairly plain t-shirts, single color t-shirts.
You always get the really chic business person though, who's like hanging outside with a cool briefcase. Maybe they're on their phone taking an important business call for some reason, looking at the building.
This is where business happens.
I actually like grabbed a rendering and changed all the people's faces so they were the same guy. So it was this dude in his apartment having a beer with himself and himself and himself. And all of them are just like pointing and smiling and stuff.
That is an introvert dream right there.
Let's continue the tour. This has been our little stop on the back balcony. We've just chilled and made some jokes. Now we need to head back inside and get the business done. Going down the hallway and then having a look at the laundry. What's the deal legally here with laundries?
No requirement for in-suite laundry. It's a great feature to add, and you can legitimately increase your rent if you provide, at the very least, a rough-in. You know, I guess like many older units in Montreal don't come with appliances. New units might, or new rental units, I should say.
I assume that a lot of these units, these old walk-ups, have just over time squeezed in suite laundries, you know, in nooks and crannies where they could.
And like it looks like this space, I would wager that it was like stacked vertically, right? So you had maybe your dryer on top of your washing machine.
We had the dryer on the left, but it stopped working, so we took it down the stairs.
That's the day that Patrick wished that he had barrier-free access.
For sure.
God, I wish there was just 50 centimeters more space on this landing zone.
Elevator would have been nice, eh?
I assume like this like historically probably would have been a space for someone in the 1930s to hang and dry smoked meat or perhaps abuse their children.
It's equally possible that the demising walls, the partitions would have changed over time, right? They could have renovated this unit at some point in time. The layout is not necessarily fixed.
There was one other unit that was a different layout. I think it had the kitchen in the front instead of the bedroom.
Interesting.
A lot of that is dictated by stacks, right, Zach? Like where the plumbing is.
You want to stack washrooms, you want to stack kitchens as best as possible. Shafts for services.
I made just a note here. I noticed in Montreal, it's pretty much always vented dryers, which mean that you have to run this tube out to the exterior.
Yeah, so that's not something you'd see in a modern building. There would just be a vent somewhere.
Something I was wondering is why we don't see condenser dryers more often, given that they are more energy efficient and they don't require the external tube.
Yeah, I don't know. Couldn't tell you.
I know that they're a newer technology, so I don't know. Okay, and then your economics here basically like putting in en-suite laundry will like pay for itself for most landlords.
When you're conceiving of a rental building, right, it's going to be around for a while. You're going to be collecting rent on the thing for, decades. So sometimes costs up front are quite insignificant or often pay for themselves in even the medium term.
I mean, even in a retrofit sense, you could literally go to the bank and be like, I want to put these in, so I need $50,000, and then the rent will come up. Going into the living room / kitchen here, what's the legal situation with the living room kitchen?
There actually are minimum areas required for certain rooms. So I pulled up the living room needs to be 13 and a half square meters. And this kitchen actually looks pretty good if it had to be for a barrier-free unit, because there's no island, there are no obstructions. You could like freely turn if you were in a wheelchair. You would typically see a few things at different heights, because if you're down in a wheelchair, you might have to reach a little lower. But it's set up pretty well.
When we're talking about like at least preferences, I assume that the whole like kind of open concept living space thing has created a lot of changes as far as like what was built and what would be built today.
White people renovating houses.
You see less units that have long corridors, for instance. Flow and circulation is a little bit more prioritized. Access to daylight, for sure. Where kitchens are concerned, though, people still love islands.
Were they a typical feature in the past?
Islands, I'm not sure. I don't know exactly how long they've been around, but I lived in like older apartments all my life, and none of them had islands. They were all like weird galley kitchens.
I would have assumed that in the past kitchens were smaller, just like from the places I've lived in that weren't renovated. The kitchens were always seemed a lot smaller than the new kitchens that I
think the islands sort of evolved out of people having them in their single family homes. And the rise of the condo came about where people were owning units and sort of demanded the same style of amenities.
And so they kind of stole a little bit of living space, like in the living room, to make the kitchen a bit bigger and turned it into this kind of unified.
Yeah, you see definitely like a lot of units where the kitchen and the living room are in the same physical space, right? Anecdotally, like I do think that living rooms and bedroom sizes have gotten smaller as we build newer.
Is that just an economic thing?
Yeah, it's probably largely a function of economics.
Okay, I think that kind of covers us for the kitchen, weirdly enough. I kind of thought that would be a place with a lot of... That's a good example of just above a fridge there. It seems to me like in a modern unit, that would be storage and would all be built in.
Yeah, you'd have a like vertically folding up cupboard or something.
Rear stairs here. So I think this is a kind of an interesting spot. Okay, so here's your classic a shared balcony with a fire escape. I think we're going to focus on that. Here it is. Okay, so legal.
This is obviously your required second means of egress. There's no way of getting around the necessity for this.
And it's okay if that's kind of shared with all of the units on the floor.
Number of exit stairs or width of exit stairs is a function of occupant load. Typically, you would size your exit facilities based on how many people are going to use them. And if it became impractical to do a single massive stair, you would just do 2 moderately sized stairs. It's certainly a thing to have common exit facilities.
Why do exit stairs on modern buildings not look like this anymore?
So, okay, typically they're internal, right? Like just for starters, like typically in a new build, you don't see many exterior exit stairs anymore. They sort of are these self-contained boxes, and they're quite closed off because there's a fire rating requirement.
That is to make it safe to go down them in a fire? Is that what you mean?
You know, the building is not designed to withstand a fire so much as it's designed to withstand a fire for a certain period of time in which you would be able to escape the building.
Okay, so it's just the last place to catch on fire
Every unit in a modern building would be treated this way, where like every unit is its own fire compartment. It varies by building type, but you have a certain amount of time to escape your unit or wait in your unit for rescue. The same principle applies to a fire stair. It's a fire compartment. So it would last you, 2 hours, for instance, in certain occupancies.
Is there kind of an option in these building codes for you sprinklered so you can have a narrower stair, say, or is it always just a hard line?
It's not you can have a narrower stair. You might be able to reduce your fire protection if your fire rating of your walls, of your what have you, if you provide sprinkler.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some common sense there. I guess developers will look around and see what it costs to do certain things and make a rational decision.
Yeah, that's it.
I thought it was interesting. You can see here the rooftops of the other buildings. Was there anything here that you're kind of like, oh, that's interesting, like you wouldn't do that anymore?
I actually think it's great. It's usable space, right? The more you can use, the better.
That rooftop patio over there was put in like a few weeks before he moved out. So that's new.
Yeah, you can kind of see, I used to work in a building on a plateau that was pretty tall, and you could see that those retrofits going in. And it's intriguing that people in the past didn't make more use of that space,
In the plateau zoning, there are provisions to protect views of the mountain, which comes as no surprise. It's Montreal, it's a big part of the city's overall bylaws. But given the fact that a lot of views are protected, if you can make use of your rooftop, it can be a really cool place to be. I wouldn't say you're guaranteed a good view, but there's just many opportunities for good viewing.
I can tell you that there was a rooftop opposite my work which had an excellent view because there was a gay bathhouse occupying the building. I have seen some things there that I never thought that I would see. It was an exciting place. All right, I think that covers us for the tour. Here's the overarching question. What requirements make the classic style 1920s medium density walk-ups a thing that developers don't build? in Canada?
I think there's, maybe an umbrella answer that has to do with all the things we've already discussed. They're just like maybe a little less efficient. It's easier to have a common building entrance, even if there's an elevator. Like, it's easier, it's more functional. You could even have a smaller footprint. Several of the building code things we discussed, made this building in particular a little obsolete.
Something that I wasn't expecting going into this is that the amount of stuff that is the way it is because of regulation is a lot less than I had thought. A lot of the things we do are actually more because of preference.
We can have a long conversation about the building code, which is very, very long. It lays out standards. It seeks to protect, building occupants. It's very concerned with life safety, and nowadays very concerned with accessibility. It is generally not going to tell you what you can clad your building with. It's prescriptive, but it certainly allows you the flexibility to design something that could be unique.
If a client came to you and said, I really like the Montreal walk-ups, I want a triplex, please. Exactly like Montreal, and I want to plonk it in Toronto. Could you just build it?
Yeah. I mean, the accessibility standards in Toronto are a little bit more stringent from my research. Triplex wouldn't need to be barrier-free. I'm not sure you couldn't build it, but I really wouldn't want to take another city's vernacular architecture and sort of just plop it into another city, like a weird Las Vegas-esque. It seems like a terrible idea, You might take some inspiration. You definitely see townhouses going up in almost every city. That's just a great way to address scalable density. That's something that Montreal can teach other cities.
We're making a little Montreal. We're gonna set up a street, and it's gonna be like, you can come from Montreal and feel at home here. Would you run into just kind of things that were like, hey man, like external staircases? You can't do those, or like the cost of the iron in the external staircase. It's not even a material we use anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would be easier to do one entrance and common vertical transportation. It just would. People
like it because it's existing, but if given the choice to construct, they're not going to build it again. Like it's a product of its time.
Most developers are looking for more density. So, more units in a footprint. And if you go bigger, you're definitely going to need an elevator. And then obviously, what's the point of building exterior stairs?
What I'm also learning from this discussion is that we're not as bad as we think at building medium density nowadays. Like, I was surprised to find that, like you were saying, that anecdotally room size seems to be getting smaller, because I thought that was the opposite. I thought houses were getting bigger. But is it houses like in the suburbs are getting bigger, but like in downtown, they're actually...
Houses are custom, right? And also can be mass developed. So I can't really comment too much on the sort of bedroom size of a subdivision house, but I do think that room sizes are shrinking in sort of mass-produced apartment and condo buildings.
If someone said to you, there's no need to build higher than 10 stories, we should just build super blocks like Barcelona, what would you say to them?
I asked them if they had time for a chat, for a sit down, and we'd go over a lot of the points that we've gone over in this video. Barcelona is beautiful in Barcelona. I don't think we should be too eager to import other styles, especially when we have like a pretty strong style of our own.
And I mean, when you look at what's possible in Montreal, if you feel so strongly that you would like medium density walk-ups, then make that part of your decision when you go to purchase.
It's a good design city. It has very solid bones, among the best in North America. We don't need a stylistic rebrand. This isn't Phoenix. We're already dense. We're already beautiful. There's nothing wrong with what we have. There's also nothing wrong with added density. I'm not in favor of, tearing down walk-ups to build skyscrapers. But, if you have a vacant parking lot downtown and the walk-ups there were demolished in 1950, then you're not getting them back. You might as well go for it.
Let her rip.
Yeah.
This is a video I've wanted to do for a very, very long time. So, I have a million questions about architecture, and I'm really glad that I bumped into you on those forums,